Hey, y'all. So we are looking at the making of Renaissance society. We're going to be focusing on the economic, social, and family patterns and how we begin to see distinct changes that will lead us into the modern era. Our first claim, the first sub-claim that Dr. Spivogel made, is basically the economic recovery created Renaissance Europe. And I absolutely agree with this. I do believe it's part of what we call the commercial revolution that occurred between the 14th and 16th centuries that really transformed everything. It's about expansion of trade, revival of industries, and really the expansion of banks. And we'll see how all that plays out. But today, here we start. First, we see here medieval Europe. We're at Constantinople. That is the center of all trade coming out of the Crusades. Clearly, they want to get there. But in this area over here, there's really no infrastructure. If you don't know what infrastructure is, that's roads, bridges, anything like canals, any of these things that connect. And really, in this isolation during the Dark Ages and even during the wars of the late Middle Ages, there's very little infrastructure, really very little value. So that's going to have to change. And how does it change? How does Northern and Western Europe gain access to Constantinople? Really, the first major answer is Hansa, this expansion of trade that really is led by Hansa. What is Hansa? Hansa is this merchant and artisan guild that formed in hopes of adding value. Look up here, these little red dots are cities that form into Hansa. Individually, these cities have very little value for the Italians. The Italians, they're going to need to have value. When I think about this, so if the Italians are here, the Italians are going to have to send boats all the way out here. That's dangerous. It's not, it's definitely not safe, dangerous. They can lose value. So there has to be something that Hansa does. And what happens is they forge together this transnational organization that goes from London all the way to Russian cities, primarily northern Germany, and they're going to forge together and they're going to begin to cooperate. And this is a cooperation that says, hey, if we get together and pool our resources, we will have value. And each of those red cities will create a trade calendar. And so the Hanseatic League, which is another term for Hansa, they organize, and each week or month, each of these little cities would organize a trade fair. And what would happen is, once that calendar was sent out to Venice, the Flanders fleet of Venice would then go out there because they knew if they went to one of these trade fairs, they would be able to offload silk, spices, and other elements, sell them, but they would also able to buy the fur and silk and wool and other industries here. So it really added value. And that's when the Venetian Flanders fleet really developed to connect Northern Europe to Constantinople. Sometimes it's called the Flanders fleets of Venice. I always call it the Venetian Flanders fleet. These are three very important details because Hansa is this united economic zone. They begin to work together. They create opportunities to buy and sell goods. These big trade fairs, they're very highly scheduled, and then the Flanders fleet of Venice would then sell up there, buy and sell, and then anything they would buy, they would go off and go all the way to Italy, and then to what city? Constantinople. Really important, and all of a sudden, for the first time since antiquity, Northern Europe is really going to be connected to the rest of the world in trade, at least the known world, and this is really going to spark and increase this wealth. So here we see a little conclusion here. So what happens? Hansa up here added value. They organized a calendar of trade fairs that really attracts them. And then the Venetian fleet would come out on a regular basis, come back, and they would go this way. And then all of a sudden, for the first time, Northern Europe is connected to Southern Europe as well as the rest of the world's trade. Again, so significant. And we begin to see all of Europe really begin to recover. You begin to see these old industries, the woolen industry, silk, glassware, and other artisan products that really kind of came to a standstill coming out of antiquity. They come to a standstill, and really they lose any value. But now all of a sudden, with Hansa and the Venetian Flanders fleet, we begin to see expansion. And then you even have new industries such as printing that we're going to talk about next week, mining and metallurgy, which is the creating of metal product. So now all of a sudden, it's not just a singular industry. Now all of a sudden, there's significant value throughout Hansa and the rest of Europe, which is really going to generate a connectivity. And now Asian and African merchants in Constantinople are going to desire European products. So by 1450, Italy and Northern Europe saw economic emergence that really would lead to that what we call the commercial revolution that we're going to study when we look at the age of exploration. And another huge sign of recovery is the development of banking. Banking had really lost, again, we talked about how during the Dark Ages, there's really very little accessible gold. There's really no coinage. The barter system was a norm. And now all of a sudden, we begin to see these families. And Italy's going to lead the way. Really, Florence will be the birthplace of most of this. The banks begin to reorganize society. Every society who wants to have economic development must have banks. Banks help organize the capital. The capital turns into capital investment, then it turns into infrastructure. That's going to be the idea here. And these are not going to be the banks that you and I know. These are going to be very wealthy families who make significant money, and they're going to be able to loan money out. Banks would loan money to artisans and merchants, and they start charging interest because now these families are like, "Hey, I'm going to give you money, but in return, since you're making stuff, as you're making wealth, we demand a return for our investment." That's going to be a really important concept later. So, in banks, these families would really loan money to rulers for mining rights. And then that's how these individual families, such as the Medici of Florence, they're going to be so significant. The Medici family, really, from everything I understand, they are the fathers, if you will, of modern banking to a degree. Actually, the word bank, from what I've understood, comes from banco, which means bench. And what the Medici would do is sit the bench down, or the banco, and the artisans would come to them and they would borrow money, pay money, and then that would become the foundation of their bank. So the economic recovery is really, really important. So now all of a sudden we begin to see, before we go on to the next slide, I want to make sure you understand we see an economic recovery through the expansion of trade. That expansion of trade is all about what? Hansa, trade fairs, Venetian Flanders fleet. We see how that really rejuvenated the industries, old industries such as the wool industry recover, and the new industries such as the mining begin to expand. And now individual families such as the Medici of Florence really begin to blossom. They have so much wealth that they're going to be able to formulate the first step towards modern banking. Clearly, there's changes going on. I'm going to pause here.